It's August 29th, 2017. This is Wes Fryer, and I'd like to share some thoughts with you about considering audience and purpose for classroom websites, and specifically helping think about these things when you decide what tool or platform is most appropriate for a classroom website or whether you even need to create one. I think digital tools, like many other kinds of tools, can be a little bit like a hammer and a nail. Sometimes we get very familiar with a specific tool, and so we want to use that tool whenever we can. But just like, as is the case with a toolbox of tools, digital tools for publishing and sharing have very different purposes. And when we consider audience and purpose, this really should guide our selection for the tool that we want to use. And so Seesaw is a fantastic platform, and we are just having some amazing interaction with parents and sharing with our teachers using Seesaw, but it can't do everything when it comes to digital sharing. And so while I am a very passionate and enthusiastic advocate for Seesaw and digital portfolios and using it for students to show what they know and provide that window into the classroom for parents, and then opportunities for digital citizenship conversations with students, I would say that it just can't do everything, and it's important to consider our purposes and our audiences and whether or not we want to look for some other tools to use when creating digital content. So overall, I would use that metaphor of a toolbox, thinking about what is in your digital media toolkit. And certainly for the teachers at our school, and that's what I had originally prepared this presentation for last week when some of our elementary teachers had asked me to come help them learn a little bit about Google Sites and other options for publishing information about their classrooms. I would put some other things in that toolkit and say that we want to be familiar with some other tools. And certainly Seesaw as a learning journal and digital portfolio would be great to be in there, but also Google Docs. Our school for about the past 6 years has been a Google Campus, a now called G Suite, for Education Campus. And so Google Docs can be really flexible, but they have certain limitations. Google Sites, which is the icon there in the bottom left corner on the right sidebar, is also a really good tool, but also your school website, depending upon how that is set up and what you are able to share with parents as well as with students and the ages of your students. All of those things are important to have as tools in your digital toolkit for sharing and publishing content with a variety of folks. So overall, I would say the why of this conversation is that a classroom website can provide a sharing space that will not only showcase learning, but will also encourage dialogue. And I am definitely more aware than ever today about privacy concerns and surveillance and about all kinds of things that are happening with respect to social media and sharing content. But I'm also still very aware and passionate about the benefits of sharing. And that dialogue that we encourage can not only be dialogue between parents and us as the teacher, and parents and their children, and children and their peers, children us, but it can also be professional dialogue that happens among colleagues at school or colleagues that are beyond the walls of our school. And so all of these things are reasons to consider not only sharing things within the walls of your classroom, be those virtual or physical, but also outside those walls. So I want to encourage everybody to think about audience when you are examining different tools that you might use for sharing content, and recognize that our audience can extend beyond the students that are in front of us, obviously, to parents, but also colleagues at school and other teachers. And while those other teachers or even those colleagues may not be at the foremost of our mind, certainly I have found in so many cases inspiration from the generous sharing of other teachers. And I think it's an important thing to consider who we want to communicate with. And depending upon the age of our students, certain tools are going to be more or less of a fit. For instance, we do create Google accounts for our elementary students, and they start to learn how to use those to create Google Docs and to be able to do some collaborative presentations and media production. But we don't actually have them logging into our main school website. So the audience that we want to reach and the age of our audience is important. In addition, purpose. I mentioned collaborating with school colleagues, but we also may want to provide resource links for students as well as for parents. You know, the internet is a huge, wonderful library, and of course, it's also a library that has, dark alleyways and dark corners and places that we're not wanting our students to be going. It can really be helpful to provide links for students when they're doing a research project, or just when we want to provide some places for them to go to be able to extend their learning. I think it's also very valuable to provide links to classroom media channels. And by that I mean potentially your classroom YouTube channel. You may have a Twitter channel that you're sharing information either professionally as a teacher or from your classroom. You also may be using Seesaw and wanting to let parents connect to the Parents and Families app and give them a heads up that they can get a link or a code from you in order to join your classroom. You also might be doing things like publishing a radio show or a podcast, and those kinds of channels can all be linked there. In addition, of course, photos. I've been a big fan of Flickr, but am now using Google Photos more. And again, that's part of our Google universe as a Google G Suite school. And so being able to provide those kinds of links to parents, being able to let them see into our classroom, and especially hear and celebrate the learning and the work that their students are doing as well as others, is really fantastic. So sharing lesson ideas with others is important, and we shouldn't sell that short in terms of its importance in the broad scheme of innovation and getting better, because one of the best ways to get better is to be connected to others who are sharing ideas. And so if we weren't sharing lesson ideas with others, we wouldn't have as many opportunities to be inspired. So at our school, we are using a web platform that is created by a company called Blackbaud. It's called OnCampus. And so we call that My Cassidy. And so parents as well as students that are middle school and high school students will log in to what we call My Cassidy. And this is where parents log in to see grades, where students in the middle school and high school are able to see grades, and other school information is published and shared. Calendars are available. Parents can opt in for notifications to be able to find out when a game is happening, if something's been changed, emergency notifications. There's a lot of things that are possible when parents log in as well as students. But one of the biggest cons to using our school website actually depends on the age of students. So if you are teaching elementary students at our school, or of course pre-Ks or Ks, primary students, those students are not able to log in. And so even if we're starting to do a research project with younger students, it can be great to have a site to do that, but we really can't put that inside the login of our school website. It's also not quite as flexible for embedding content as a Google site can be, especially Google Apps content. So a Google slideshow like the one I'm sharing here, YouTube videos, Google Documents, form sheets, all of those kinds of things, drawing documents, maps, those can all be pretty readily shared. And I just think it's generally not quite as customizable as Google Sites, and it's not as fast to update in terms of when you are updating things on a daily basis as Google Docs. But it's a great place to share things, especially as a middle school or high school teacher. We are encouraging our parents to log in, and in the cases of middle school and high school parents as well as students, they're frequently logging in when they're looking at assignments and things like that. So it's important to recognize the benefits, but it's also the limitations that this platform has. And of course, this platform requires a login. None of the things that are shared here are going to be openly accessible to others. So all of those thoughts about sharing with colleagues outside the walls of the school, or really even colleagues inside the school, because unless they're a co-teacher, or they happen to have a child in your class, they're not seeing your class pages. They're only visible to your students, your parents, or co-teachers that are assigned to your class. So Google Docs is really important to consider, and I don't see Google Docs as like where you're going to build your entire website, but it is certainly an important and useful free part of the G Suite for Education set of tools. It allows for very easy collaboration, and it's also fairly easy to embed, especially on a Google site, but you can also embed a Google document on other websites as well. So all of those really make a Google Doc a wonderful place, for instance, maybe to put your lesson plans or to collaborate on a shared homework page or a spelling list page or something that you're collaborating with colleagues with, and you don't each need to have your own copy. You can just collaborate. You can each embed the same document on your website. And so parents and students can have access to that same updated list, but you just have one place to go when you update those, and it really allows for quick updating. One of the biggest cons or negatives to this would be the long web links or URLs that Google Docs have. And so that's why I think it's oftentimes best to embed a Google document on a website, and then parents or students don't have to have those long addresses. They can use a shorter link in order to get to your website. So this brings us to Google Sites. And I have been a huge fan of Google Sites for a number of years. I love Google Sites for several reasons. First of all, you can set this up, and this is how I recommend our teachers set up their classroom websites, so that there's no login required. And that can really be beneficial because all of the content, of course, needs to be shared with permission and the idea that this is being publicly shared. But that just means there's not another kind of obstacle or speed bump for students or parents to have to go over or get through in order to get to the content. In fact, if you're using iPads, for instance, in the classroom, you can make a QR code that goes right to a particular page on your website, on your Google site, and then students can access that right away. Even younger students can. I also, as I've mentioned before, like how Google Sites makes it easy to embed different kinds of content. So Google Docs, YouTube videos, things like that. And you can also have an easy to remember web address. And this is something I think is generally underutilized in schools, and it's something I'm working with some of our teachers with who want to have their own websites. And it's called a subdomain, and it's just something that your school administrator needs to do to go into the domain registration website where you register domains, and it's possible to point your Google site to an easy to remember address. The one have used for STEM from 2013 to 2015 was stem.westfriar.com. We've got teachers that are setting up their websites as well. And I think that's a nice way to professionally show that your website is affiliated with the school, and to make it really nice and short so that it's easy for students to remember, easy to tell parents about. One of the cons for a Google site is that it's not as fast to update as a Google Doc, but of course you can embed Google Docs inside those pages where you're going to be updating content the most often, like maybe on a homework page or a spelling list page or something like that. And then it just can expedite that process for you. So in order to get started with Google Sites, you're going to visit sites.google.com. If you are creating your site and want it to be mapped to your own school domain, then you'll want to be sure that you're logged into your school Google account. Of course, you can independently create sites, and then you can map web addresses to those as well. But you're going to just choose to create a new site, and I recommend to our teachers that they create their child pages or their secondary pages under the home page. And what's nice about that is Google Sites creates navigation links, and you can have those in the left sidebar or the top or in some different spots, and it will nest those, so parents are always going to be able to go back to the home page, and they're going to see the pages kind of as they link, like you're nesting it, so you're putting one inside of another. So you can also find a link for customizing your Google site address, and that's a way that you could set up a website like stem.westfriar.com, or my wife the past 4 years has used classroom.shelleyfriar.com. Those are both Google sites that we've used as classroom websites. So I hope this information has been helpful to you as you think about a classroom website. I encourage you to give Google Sites a try. Currently, there are two versions of Google Sites. There's the classic older version and the newer version. And this is being recorded in August of 2017, are still sticking with the classic sites because those are the ones you can map to your domain to make that short, easy to remember, easy to share web address. But I fully expect the new Google Sites to implement that capability before long, and eventually everybody's going to have to be on the new Google Sites. But whether it's Google Sites or it's another tool, I hope that you will consider a classroom website and that you will find it to be a useful tool to communicate with different audiences and achieve different purposes as we seek to share with a variety of constituents the things that are happening in our classroom and provide timely information to those who need it. Thanks so much, and please reach out on Twitter. I am W. Fryer if you found this information helpful, and you can access these slides either with the little QR code you see there or by visiting wfryer.me/sites.